Peites Amud Beis. What's the difference between Motzi and Motzei? HaMotzi Etzim or HaMotzei Etzim? It's Motzi. Motzi, the Shorish is Yud Tzadi Aleph. The Mem is there because it's a Hifyul. So it means one who takes out. Latzeit means to go out. Hu Yatza means he went out. Lehotzi means to take something else out. He's going out by himself, but he happens to be, what's his no-no? He's carrying something from, let's say, Rosh Hashanah. Usually to go from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah is a Yetzia, right? Yetzios Shabbos. So he's taking out of his house. He lives in Midtown Manhattan. The whole place, all the streets are a big Rosh Hashanah. And his apartment building is right up against the street, and he walks out of his apartment building carrying wood. Whereas Motzei, it means to find, and the Shorish there is Mem Tzadi Aleph, and the Mem is part of the Shorish. So there's a difference between Motzi and Motzei. Okay, so what happens here? HaMotzi Etzim Kedei Levashel Beitza Kala. That is the threshold. The person carrying on Shabbos he leaves. He takes from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, and he needs to have a certain amount of wood in order to be punished. Okay, if it's just a little bit of wood, so any amount is forbidden to carry on Shabbos from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, but he's only going to be hit with a penalty if he carries beyond the threshold, and that threshold is enough wood to cook an egg. As we're going to see, Rambam brings this in the Parish of Mishnayos. The Gemara is going to say the most basic way to cook an egg is to scramble it and place it in a hot frying pan with oil, much as everybody has done throughout history. That's how you cook yourself an egg. It's the easiest way. To boil an egg or to roast an egg requires a lot more heat energy. So you're going to make a little fire, and how much fire is that? I don't know. Does anybody here still cook with firewood? No. So you could say that nowadays the miracle is that we have electricity. Does the electricity to get from the power plant to our houses through these wires, does anything actually physically travel between the house and the power plant on Shabbos? Well, how does that even work? Is there anything actually there? Is there anything of any mass transferred? Is it noticeable? Is it minkara? So that's a good question. Those who say you shouldn't use electricity on Shabbos, even turn on all your lights before Shabbos, whatever it may be, you still can't use electricity on Shabbos. Whose opinion is that? There were Rabbanim and Bnei Brak who felt that way. Why do they feel that way? Why can't you use electricity? You can't even have electrical running. Even if you turn it on before Shabbos, what's the problem? The same problem with the waterworks. You can't turn on your tap. The Stipler felt this way. What was the Stipler's claim? He filled his bathtub with water before Shabbos. That's where he got all his water for Shabbos. Why couldn't you use the water electricity on Shabbos, even automatically? Because there's the power station is running on Shabbos. The power station is generating electricity. It's likely burning something, burning coal or some other process to generate the electricity, so that you can't benefit from. Or the water plant, there's someone monitoring it and make sure there's pressure going through the machines that create the pressure in the pipes. And that's a form of Chil Shabbos, apparently, using these machines. So they felt that they should not do it. There are people who sell batteries, whole house batteries to be used Shabbos after Shabbos, enough battery power to keep your house going all Shabbos. Okay. But I guess the question would be, so how much natural gas does it take to cook an egg? If you had a tank of gas. So I think this is, when we get to the next Mishnah, we'll answer that question. Next. Tivalin kidei lithabel beisakala. Enough spices to season such an egg. How much does it take? Well, why are they seasoning it with spices instead of salt? Whatever your choice is. Salt is its own threshold, but spices is enough to give the egg some taste. Okay, how much pepper do you put on your egg? That's the answer. Umistarfim zeh im zeh. The various spices actually join with each other for the threshold. We use this basically at home. I stopped using black pepper. Instead, we use Mrs. Dash. How many ingredients does Mrs. Dash have instead of black pepper? About 30. Okay, every one of them is a spice. Klipei gozim, klipei rimonim, istatis, and pua. I know what klipei gozim are. Those are walnut shells. Walnut shells. What do they have in them? If you let walnuts soak in rain, like my children did, why? They gathered walnuts in the bucket outside. We have 2 walnut trees, and then it rained before they could bring them in and tie them. What was in the bucket when we came to see it? Black, a thick black liquid. Why? Because walnut shells make black, and that's where they get black dye. Klipe rimonim, use the peel from pomegranates. What kind of color can you get from those? It's more reddish. So they use that. And it's a good byproduct. Or istatis. I wrote this here. One is istatis and pua are woad and madder. So what are those? Those are two types of plants. Rashi explains that look here. Statis is kroig and pua is verna. So it turns out that kroig is karkum, that's yellowish, and verna is pua. It's a type of, you see this on, it depends on which Gemara you have, but they translate this for you. It turns out that one is red and one is blue. Okay, so Rashi continues when he talks about this piece vacha. We'll get to that. So those are general colors. You should know when they say adom and yarok, or blue, whatever it is, they usually just talk about two strands of colors. Everything's a type of red or a type of blue. Okay, when they mean red, they mean everything from orange to purple, and then when they mean green or blue, they mean everything from green, blue, and yellow also. Types of yellow are called green, as Rashi points out. So when you say green, you can mean yellow and you can mean blue. And then you modify it further. You say green like that means yellow and green like that means a blue. So that's how they used to make these things. Nowadays, does anybody do such a thing? They use walnut shells, pomegranate peels, woad and madder to dye anything. Well, I'm looking around. I'm seeing that we have quite a colorful collection of shirts and sweaters here. What was used to color the mostly cotton, the material that we use to make our shirts? For everybody here has a colored shirt or colored sweater or colored pants. What material was used to color their clothing? It was not woad or madder or walnut or pomegranate or anything like that. It's usually all synthetics made in the lab. Right? All the colors are synthetic nowadays. It's much easier to do it, but that's the way they used to do it. So he says, how much? Kedei litzboa behen beged katan. Enough of these materials to make dye that could color, or to dye, now as a verb, a small garment or a small piece of cloth in this case. I think it would be better to translate it as a small piece of cloth. Why? Because like we saw the last time I was here, Chazal meant when they say beged, they meant small piece of cloth, not necessarily something that has been created and has been turned into an actual garment. There's a nafkamina. Normally, only something that's an actual garment or a piece of cloth big enough to be used for some purpose is susceptible to tuma. And we also pointed out that that's referring to most materials. When you're dealing with wool or linen, you have another problem. They could actually contract tsaras. Cotton can't, no matter how big your cotton garment is, it can't actually get tsaras. You guys remember that? We discussed that. That was earlier. Okay, so let's see. I'm using my Rashi over here. Okay, let's continue here. Beged katan, what is it? Piece of acha. An example of the beged katan is the piece of acha. Rashi says what's now known as the mitpachat. Birosha zvacha. What's a svacha? Means when things get tangled. A woman would just put her hair into a bun on top of her head. Then she wants to cover it with saying, Shasa bekliya notein ma'at babeged. This woman, when she's braiding her hair, she puts a svacha up there. What is a svacha in the Bible, by the way? Basavach. What was nechaz basvach? There was a thicket where Abraham's ram got its horn stuck. I mean, it's a big tangle of something there. So it says notein ma'at beged. She puts a little piece of cloth there. Upstairs, I saw something that I haven't seen since way back in America. Outside the women's section upstairs, there's a little receptacle with doilies. Okay, doilies. Remember doilies? My grandmother had a doily. Okay, doilies serve two purposes. You put them underneath a lamp, or underneath a cookie, or you put on top of your head if you're a little old lady and you go to shul. So I think this would be more of a doily because a doily is just a mesh, whereas this is talking about a beged that actually is halachically a beged. Let's see what else. Mei raglayim neter uvorit kimolia va'ashla kedei lechabes beged katan. Enough of these materials in order to launder, or sometimes maybe whiten, once again, small piece of garment. Now, what are these things? Mei raglayim means urine. I do not believe, like in other places, that this is referring to human urine. Usually they're talking about something taken from a behemoth. Okay? That's the Havamina when it says they were trying to make the incense. They said, "Hello, mei raglayim yafima." Wouldn't it be better to use urine for such a circumstance? So they weren't talking about human urine. They're talking about, I guess, something cleaner, so to speak. Let's say from a behemoth that is herbivorous. Why? How do we know this? That it's technically cleaner. The excretions of, let's say, a behemoth are cleaner. Where does it say such a thing? Let's say than humans. It says the prophet Yechezkel was given quite a harsh prophecy that he had to act out because the Nevi'im were given when they were told to something. This is what's going to happen in the future. They were then bidden to do an act or actions that indicated that which has been proclaimed is now going to begin to happen. Familiar with this concept? So Yechezkel was told about the impending destruction of Jerusalem, and God told him that he's going to be eating pretty low quality bread. Make this bread this way, and the baking process of this horrible bread would have to be baked on coals from human excrement. That is, he's supposed to burn excrement, human excrement, and use those coals like the Arabs. They sometimes, those Bedouin types, they cook their bread directly on the coals. And for this, Yechezkel Navi actually objected. He pleaded to God. He said that he's been pretty much a clean person his entire life. Chazal say it means that his high standards were that even if the meat had a question asked about it, and turns out it was kosher, he didn't even eat that. Anything that had a question, he didn't eat. So Yechezkel had very high standards, and he says to God, it's really bad that please don't make me have to bake my bread on coals of human excrement. So God told him, fine, I'll give you a second option. You could use Gelilei Behemah, use cow or sheep excrement, which is cleaner, technically speaking, right? That wouldn't be so bad to use those types of coals, and then he would be able to bake his bread. And as you know, we use, even unto today, the refuse of these herbivorous animals, the behemoths, we use them actually as fertilizer. Whereas you cannot fertilize your field with, let's say, human excrement. So that which the humans excrete is not as clean as that which the behemoths excrete, which is why they're talking about here, it seems, mei raglayim of an animal. But be that as it may, why would they be using such a substance for laundering? What does that have to do with anything? Mei raglayim. So the answer is that it has a certain ammonia content, and as it gets older, the ammonia content increases. They're protein compounds in the urine, and that is used as a basic type of bleach. Before they came up with, was it the Bessemer process or some other one? Mass producing what nowadays we just use as bleach, which you could get in a jug, a 4-liter jug down the block for about 12 shekels. This is how they used to make such a thing. And there were even times in history where clothing was pretty stinky. We wanted to keep clothing white, so they're really using urine and even human urine to do such a thing. Rashi also describes in Bava Basra how there was even compounds that they took from dog excrement used for tanning or sometimes even laundering purposes. You put some of it at the bottom of the water, it creates a reaction in there that's also used for kibbutz. Pretty crazy, that's what they had to use. Where are these other substances? We have neter and borit. Neter is natron. It's actually related to the old Latin term, and where sodium gets its name from, at least its Latin name. You look on the periodic table, sodium isn't represented by an S or an SO or SD. What's the chemical symbol for sodium? Na, from natron. So what is natron used for? Natron is mineral. It's usually basically, it's not one particular chemical, but most of them, what they have in common is that they all have sodium minerals. Sodium hydroxide, sodium carbonate, and a bunch of others. And there's certain deposits in the desert you could get. What were the Egyptians using the natron for besides laundering? They're using it to dry up mummies. Okay? Major preservative. Very salty, dry stuff. And it takes out the liquid from something and makes it dry. So they're using that. And borit is lye. Lye also comes from the ground. And the main thing that all the minerals in the lye have in common is the hydroxide. So sodium is on the left side of the periodic table. That's a plus. The ion in there is a plus. Hydroxide is a combination of oxygen and hydrogen, but it's still on the negative side. If you'd mix, hydroxides with the sodium compounds, you're just going to get salt. and some other reactions going on. So there you go. And it's usually very basic because you have hydroxide in the mix there. It's basic. So all of these chemicals had cleaning properties. Chemolia, they say later. You have a good translation there. Rashi says chemolia. I think it's from a plant source. The Gemara will explain. And ashlag is the old name. What they used to call this in the olden days. Anybody hear of potash? What is potash? That's also a mineral. You dig up potash is what they thought they could dig up and they could exploit the Dead Sea area. It's full of minerals like this. Potash is mostly what's the main mineral in potash that gives it whatever it is that they're looking for, its properties, the potassium. Potassium, as you could hear, is sort of a Latinized word from the word potash. And that's why the modern Hebrew, if you go to high school here, when you learn your periodic table, the potassium is called ashlagan from this word potash. And sodium, let's see, sodium also, that's a new name from soda. A lot of the old words for everything that had sodium, it was called soda. Baking soda. Why is it called soda? Because it has sodium in it, sodium bicarbonate. Okay, so good words. Maybe we could have even a class of the different, the etymologies that the various people here had to use to come up with proper Hebrew names for all the elements, because they're not ancient. Only some really good ones like gofrit, which is sulfur. It's been around forever, so there's a native Hebrew word, or kesef, barzel, zahav, etc. The choshes, those are all on the table. But oxygen and the nitrogen and hydrogen need new Hebrew names. So what's carbon, by the way? Pachman, from coal. Kedei lechabes beged katan, we read that. And mentioned again, the pisvacha, the mitpacha. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kedei leha'avir et haketem. Actually, all these cleaning items, it's enough not just to do kibus, which is the first cleaning. Let's say you're making it out of wool. The most basic act of kibus mentioned in Sidur, in the Malachos, what? So they shear the sheep, right? And they have to comb the wool. They also have to melabin. Melabin means the initial cleaning of the wool before you could just use it. You should clean it a little bit. So that's the most basic kibus. That's the av malacha. In this case, he's talking about something even more than that. You actually got a stain on it. Stains take more. Most of us, we live today, we put our clothing in the washing machine. And there's a basic detergent that works, generally speaking, for most of our clothes. But for that which has a pretty nasty stain, for whatever reason, usually that which you do for a normal wash doesn't get it out. Instead, you have to apply a much harsher chemical, something stronger. Okay. And if you're foolish, you just use bleach. And yeah, if the thing is white, so that's what they used to do. Certain white materials, they could take the bleach and it'll get out all the stains. But if you don't want to destroy everything else that your wife has, you have to go to the store and get something a little bit more powerful that's not bleach. And even then, you should be careful. So he says, enough to remove the stain. How much is that? A few ml? I don't know. But apparently they knew this back in the day. Tanina. So let's see. There's a Mishneh teaching here in the Gemara. Chada Zimna. They saw this was one time. Kaneh kedei lasot kumus. They're talking about how much of a reed does a person have to bring out from, let's say, Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah to be hit with the penalty. So he says a reed that's enough to make a quill. In this case, the word quill came from large feathers, right? Large feathers are called quills. Why? Because they use those to make writing implements, the most basic pen. How does it work? You dip this tube, that's basically what it is, into the inkwell, and through capillary action, it sucks up some of the ink, and then you could write a few letters before you have to dip it again and get more. Anybody hear a sofer? No? Okay. Some sofrim still use such a, basically they say that's what you have to use, but people are less traditionalist and say, if you could use a modern pen to hold your ink, then you don't have to keep dipping into the inkwell. So that's also just as good. No one ever said it has to be a quill. That's what they had. So he's saying using a reed for this purpose. And he says, it's too thick. It's not meant for writing. Or it's all broken up. So what use does this have? Well, fuel. In the olden days, most things, they didn't have any synthetic materials back then that you couldn't really burn. Everything was organic, right? So once it's not useful anymore, at least it could be used for firewood. Like Chazal say, broken kalim, you have wooden kalim that broke. You can't really fix them. What is their use now? Lag va'omer. So he says, enough fuel, kedei le'ashel beit sakala, Shabbat Etzim, Trufa Untana Be'opas. Okay, the lightest egg among the eggs, which Chazal say, Rambam says, is the chicken egg, like we've been using all along. Okay, because that's what we've always had, and it's been beaten or scrambled in this case and put in the frying pan. Okay, put into a frying pan. Rambam adds, if I'm not mistaken, he adds oil. Okay, because you can't put an egg into a frying pan without oil. Then what will happen? It won't come out of the frying pan. So that's what, at least before they invented Teflon and all those other things. So he says if you have a quill, that's what you have to do. It's either good as a pen or it's good for firewood. So this is a little bit of a question. Where's the question here? What should he have done? We already heard this once. Tanina Chada Zimna, that once the Mishnah started with the statement that, well, how much firewood is the threshold to cross the prohibition, the punishment line on Shabbos? Well, enough firewood, enough fuel to cook an egg. But we already saw this regarding a quill, that the quill is useful if it's useful as a quill. So that's already a threshold for an avera. But if the quill is useless, now it's firewood, and the amount of firewood is enough to cook an egg. So we already knew about this. That's the threshold of cooking. That's the threshold for that which is going to be used as firewood. Etzim lav dafka. So the answer the Gemara gives is Mahu Desema. Well, we taught this because you would have thought Hasamu delo chazi lemide. There, when we're talking about these items, this quill, it has absolutely no use. A quill that cannot be used as a writing implement is basically just firewood. You can't imagine some other use. So now the threshold, the amount of quill, we have to look at it a different way. We have to see, is this enough to make a fire that will cook an egg? Aval Etzim, when we're talking about wood, firewood usually, the chazu lechaka da'aklida, which could be used for, they say, Rashi says the shane of the mafteach. Okay, how does a key? Apparently they use the base of the key is made out of wood. Even just a little bit of wood would be enough for that. Afilu kol shehu kamash malan. A little bit of wood can be used to fashion a piece of a key. So maybe the wood, actual wood, has a lower threshold of punishment for carrying that outside on Shabbos. Kamash malan, no, even if you're dealing with random pieces of wood, still you have to look at it. Can this wood be used to make a fire? Nowadays, what do we use to make our keys? What materials use keys? It's not made out of iron. The keys you get at the hardware store. Yeah, but what metal? So Chazal wouldn't recognize this. It's a new metal that they're digging out nowadays, nickel. Okay, it's mostly a nickel alloy, but mostly nickel. Why is that important? Because it used to be coins were actually made out of precious metals. There was silver in them. And sometimes if they wanted to dilute the silver, they used tin. Okay, tin to dilute the metal. Or if it's real good money, they use gold. But nowadays, the governments have realized that that's sort of expensive. Better to hold on to the gold and the silver, and instead make all your coins out of mostly nickel. And they put in, to make color, they use a little zinc, copper. In America, remember, your dollars, your quarters and dimes are made out of a sandwich, a copper sandwich, but those are mostly nickel. The shiny metal looking, the silvery material is nickel. And you know it's nickel because real silver is much heavier. So nickel makes a certain sound. It's just today's, print as much as you want or mint as much as you want. And the same thing of our keys. Our keys that they cut and they copy from each other in the hardware store are made out of the same cheap nickel metal that they use to make coins nowadays. So we'll pick this up, I guess, on Thursday. Have a good day, everybody, on Online Land. We'll talk more about this next time.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.